Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Race Reaction podcast. Today we have a very special episode lined up. We're here with Greg McColl from Motorsportmind. Pleasure to have you. Would you mind giving a bit of a kind of intro to yourself and what you do?
Not at all. Thank you for having me. Great to speak with you. So, I work with drivers and riders in motorsport. 99% of who I deal with is motorsport. Occasionally, I get an Olympic athlete or an MMA fighter that likes motorsport and says, "Oh, can I work with you?" But it's motorsport. It's everybody from Bambino and Honda Cadet Carters who are like 8 and 10 years old, all the way up. I think my oldest driver at the moment is 60, 59, 60. And that's everybody from, people that are just starting the racing journey all the way through to Premier Class. Every year, I kind of work with about 30, 35 drivers and riders every year. I can't do more than that because there's only so many hours in a day. And it's really just helping them be the best versions of themselves, because everybody spends so much time in the gym. Everybody spends so much time on the sim. And they forget that when they go racing, there is a doer that has to do the doing. And if you show up right with this and you've got the focus and the concentration and the self-management, you can reduce the variables. Because we spend so much time looking at onboarding data and setting up cars. What about this thing? What about the meat machine? We've got to pay attention to that, because if we get that right, we can make our racing lives a lot more consistent, predictable, and reliable. So it's an interesting thing. I'm very much about the practicalities of it, as opposed to, well, this is a fancy idea and this is a fancy idea, because ideas are great, but it's what you do differently and how you develop your own tools, techniques, strategies, and routines, so that you always show up the right person at the right time when you go racing. Because we know you don't get a do-over. It's a one-time deal, and you've got to show up that version of you at that moment in time.
Yeah, and well, I guess, could you tell us a bit about your role? So what does the average day look like for a mental performance coach? I mean, is that kind of the title? Am I saying that right? So what kind of is your role in that sense? What makes your role unique?
Yeah, when people come to work with me, it's either because they want an advantage or there's something that's limiting their performance in some way. They're being hindered by themselves. The worst opponent to have on track, you. Because that's usually the hardest one to beat. And in racing, we see... I want to talk about confidence, because it's the word that I don't like, and I think it's relied too much upon in racing, whereas competence is a far more important thing. A typical day for me, it depends. When I start working with people, it depends why I've started to work with them, whether it's for the competitive advantage or whether we're solving a problem. If I go back, probably about 6-7 years ago, I had a driver that asked me, "So, is what you do an additive process or a subtractive process?" Good question. Never thought about it like that. And 60% is subtractive. If I can help people get out of their own way, that's usually the first thing to do. We've got to be able to, I call us a salty bag of meat. We've got to be able to manage the salty bag of meat so that it is more stable. As the stress and the load comes in, physical and mental, we're able to manage ourselves better. And then the other 40% is taking what you already do well and helping you to do it better. So a usual sort of day for me, it will be, it depends whereabouts in the world you're talking with. I mean, it might start at 7 a.m. My last call might be at 11 p.m. It just depends if it's Southern Hemisphere or if it's the US. And a session's, usually about an hour, although they do tend to go on a bit sometimes. And you're looking at what have you been doing, so if you're out racing like this weekend, so next week I'll be talking to drivers and riders about their weekend this weekend, what went well, what didn't go quite so well, what could they improve upon, what did they learn, what did they do in their preparation to make sure that they did show up the best versions of themselves, what didn't they do, what didn't they manage to do. And then we'll look at tools and techniques and strategies that might address the things that have come up that weekend, or we'll be going through the kind of program of where we build up their mental skills over time. And then we'll spend an element of the session then at the end looking at, okay, so what's coming up, right? What's coming up next weekend? What are we going to do differently? What have we learned from last weekend that we're going to do next weekend? Let's plan it, let's get it all structured, and let's go out there prepared, because preparation is performance, you know. I always say it's like, if you think about exams, school, university, if you know your subject, if you know it, an exam's not a thing. It's just you rocking up and going, okay, what do you want to know? There you go, done. Right? It's not stressful if you know it. And performances like that, when we go racing, if we are properly prepared, mentally, physically, technically, when we show up, that's just the delivery part of it. That should be the easy part. Because it's just going through the process that we've worked on, developed and prepared. Yeah? So that's generally a kind of normal session for me. And the number of sessions I have every day just varies, because it depends on seasons, time of the year, if this southern hemisphere is starting while we're stopping, and then of course there's always racing in the Middle East, sort of 365 days a year. So it just depends.
I love that that quote that you gave. Preparation is performance. I really like that, and I think so. I mean, with Race Reaction, we look quite a lot at Formula One. It's obviously up for debate whether you think that it's the elite, so to speak, of motorsport. I would argue it's not.
Contentious, Miles. Contentious.
I would argue it's not necessarily.
Can I ask you why you would argue such a thing?
I would say Formula One has, as with any category, they've all got their set of physical and mental demands, and skill sets. I think a good rally driver is very different from a good Formula One driver. It's, well, in terms of physical skill set, perhaps mentally it's similar, and you might be able to give a bit more insight about that. But I think you cannot give a definitive who is the best driver in the world, because if you look at the top, the top contenders from each category, they've all got very different things to manage in the race. They've all got very different ways of racing. I mean, bike racing is very different to car racing, to sports car, to open wheel. So, there's a bit of give and take. But I was going to ask, obviously, speaking of different categories, you've worked with a variety of people, drivers, other personnel in several categories of motorsport. Yeah. Is there a kind of continued thread that you've noticed, or persistent psychological trait that exists amongst the top people in their...
Yes, I think the biggest barrier to success is the focus on results. Because we get so focused on the result, we forget that something has to come before that. You've got to do the job to get the result, so focus on the job. And when we focus on that preparation, it takes a lot of the stress off of us, because I can actually do something about the preparation. The result's not actually up to me. In racing, there's so many factors, and the driver rider is but one part. And so the result and the outcome, you could be the best driver and the best car, and at the last lap, every single session, every single race weekend, you get taken out. Now, if you're focused and motivated, what they call extrinsic motivation, by the results and the platitudes and the glory, your emotional response is going to be peak, trough, peak, trough, peak, trough, because you're just driven by the result. Whereas if you're driven by process and improvement and being the best, not the result, but being the best, it's far more manageable and maintainable across the long term. And the biggest challenge for me is to always get drivers to bring their attention back to what they are in control of, which is themselves, and that's it. And put all your attention there, because there's a little saying that I'll say to them, and it's like, right, if you want to go faster than the guy in P3 and you're in P4, you've got to go faster than the guy in P4 first. That's you. And if you're always going faster than yourself, everything else will take care of itself. And when you've got a singular focus, if you're on a grid of 30 people, if you're just focused on you, you've only got one person to beat. That's much more manageable than thinking, I've got 29 people to beat. Nah, keep it simple. Go faster than you. You know, you've got to be better than your own best last lap. And that's the sort of progress. So the biggest trend, of course, nearly all drivers are super competitive. And coming back to your point, I see no difference between like a 9-year-old cadet karter or a premier class driver or rider. They both want to succeed just as badly as each other, right? There's no difference, right? To them, the stakes are the same. But if they can focus on, it sounds like we should almost kick all the fun out of it, but if you approach it like a job, turning up and doing a job well, and sort of let's keep our emotions over here. You can have emotions after sessions as long as you can reset in between a session. You can have let your emotions go at the end of the day, but when you're at work, you're there to do a job. And that is to take whatever you're given and make it go as fast as it will go. That's your job. And it doesn't matter whether we call it warm-up, practice, qualifying, heats, stages. The job's the same. Take that, make it go as fast as it will go. That's it. It's that complicated. And drivers can put a lot of extra pressure on riders, a lot of extra pressure on themselves by thinking like qualifying's got a capital Q, whereas warm-up's just a small W. And it's like, no, your job's the same. You know, take it, go as fast as you can go. That's just it. It doesn't matter what we call it. It's always the same job. And when we get into this kind of workmanlike process driven, it becomes much more predictable and reliable. Well, if that answered your question.
Yeah.
No, definitely.
That's really good. I mean, in that sense, obviously you mentioned multiple different categories. Is there something different, say, a MotoGP rider would do, or you would do with them, compared to a Formula 1 driver or a cadet karter? Because do you need to take into account them as a person? Obviously, you've mentioned you work with people from different ages. Is someone who's 16 and then I don't know, Ginetta or junior seasons different compared to someone who's in their 50s?
Okay, right. So I think there's an age thing that goes on. Process is usually fairly similar because we're all human beings, right? We have a common denominator, and so when we look at things like behaviours and physiology and stuff, there's universal things that apply across the board. There is the problem of the C word, not that one. Confidence, right? And there's a certain thing. I think, interestingly, I was having a conversation with somebody the other week about how actually you think of motorsport as being this forward, progressive, intelligent, whole kind of thing. But actually, when you look at the world of mental performance, you see in other sports where you might think of them being more toxically masculine, like rugby and things like that, they're far more open about the sort of mental performance side of things. Whereas in a lot of motorsport products, there's this slight toxic masculinity that it's all about the C word, the guy that just, who's the most confident, who can send it the most? And it's just like, right, okay, that's going to work 1 in every 10 times, but the other 9 times you're not going to keep it shiny side up, or you're going to be, you're going to be in the gravel or the tyres, because just sending it and thinking that confidence is a substitute for competence It just doesn't work. I always say, if you had to go in for elective surgery, do you want the confident surgeon or the competent surgeon? I'll have the competent one, thank you. Because the competent guy could be confident. Confident guy? I don't know. If he's just going, oh, go on, give me the scalpel, I'll have a go. No, I don't want that guy near me, So competence is the thing. And I think, obviously, we all know, because we've all been young men, that when we are certain ages, there's the whole Dunning-Kruger effect kind of thing kicks in. The less you know about something, the more you think you know everything there is to know about it. And we get this kind of false sense of swagger and bravado and thinking that confidence is the key. And indeed, if you listen to engineers, mechanics, at all levels, whether it's karting through, you'll hear, and driver coaches, you'll hear the C word used all the time, including confidence. You'll hear, you're just going to be more confident in the brakes. You're just going to have more confidence going into the corner. You're just going to have more confidence overtaking. What does that even mean? Right? Because what makes you confident, Manav, is a completely different thing that makes me confident, and what makes you confident, Miles, is a completely different thing that makes me feel confident.
Yeah.
So confidence doesn't contain any information, and I think there's far too much reliance. It's a weird thing, because when you look at motorsport, how much time we spend looking at setup and data and onboard, looking for the marginal gains, yet when it comes to the human machine side of it, we're happy to go, oh yeah, just leave it up to confidence, that'll do. And it's like, no, because that will let you down. Because all it takes is a couple of weekends where things don't go to plan, and all of a sudden that magic C word, yeah, where's that going? Whereas when it's process and preparation, that's consistent. And it's that age. I usually see drivers, I would say, Manav, you mentioned like Ginetta Junior, so like sort of 14, 15 up to 19, 20 is the problem, where we get this kind of over-reliance on confidence maybe, rather than process.
It's very interesting you say, actually, about the fact that we see a lot of these competitive sports, and you think the guy in first or the person in first must be the most confident, and that's certainly what you might think, say, watching rally, for example, because it's an extremely dangerous thing. I mean, all motorsport's dangerous, as we know, but hurtling through a forest at 120 miles an hour past some trees and no real kind of safety net to fall back on, versus an enclosed track with lots of safety, facilities is very different. So if confidence isn't a thing that can be taught, and isn't, as you say, always the number one factor in success necessarily, is there something else that you in your experience have given, some piece of advice or some technique that you've used that is perhaps not something that would be expected, something slightly outside of the norm that you've seen really work?
I think that there's a couple of things that it's funny because it's almost contradictory. What we believe tends to be the thing that affects our confidence, right? So confidence generally is a collection of beliefs. If I believe I do well at this track, if I believe I've got the skill, if I believe I've got the car under me, if I believe I've got the right tyres, if I believe I go well in the wet, if I put all those beliefs together, I have this thing that we call confidence. So confidence tends to be a lack of doubt about stuff. And as unsexy as it is, the best way to not have the doubts is to be competent. Right? Because competency basically knows input, output, action, and I know that I can fairly consistently predict the results of my actions. And it's not sexy and it's not exciting. The flip side of that is the sort of beliefs and physiology of it is, I'm sure you guys have been around enough Premier Class paddocks, when you walk around the paddock, do you ever see a driver or rider walking around in these old painting joggers and a pair of, an old t-shirt with holes in it, and a pair of flip-flops? No. Why? They always look pin sharp, right? And that old saying, "Clothes maketh the man," right? There's a thing that we call anchoring and state setting, and how we feel when we do things. I'm a big believer in my drivers that are old enough. Aftershave is a wonderful thing, right? Because most drivers and riders will have an aftershave that when they put it on, they think, I smell irresistible, and that changes how you feel about yourself, your confidence, and we all know, when you can put certain things on, certain items of clothing, the same way that music helps you to set your state, we can actually create confidence. We think that confidence is a byproduct of things, but if you, I've got an analogy I use about sausage machines. If you want a tasty sausage to come out at this end, you put the right ingredients in at this end. And if you want to generate a feeling of being strong and being confident, I can share. There's a technique that I teach people, and one of the ones is like a visualization thing as well. And I've got two sort of visualized scenes that I use in this technique. First time is the first time I ever went at 50 miles an hour on a motorcycle, because it makes me smile, because I remember it so vividly. It's like, and it's such a powerful state for me. And the second one, weirdly, is not a personal memory. It's a scene from Man of Steel, right? And I think about this scene from Man of Steel, and I hear the music, and it makes me feel a certain way. Because we can generate states within ourselves incredibly easily, If you think, why do boxers have that music when they walk into the ring? Same with darts players. But because it helps you to set your state. It helps you to be that person. So we can help to create confidence a little bit by managing ourselves throughout the weekend, Instead of, I see it in younger drivers particularly as well, they get this tendency, because everybody likes to be a racing driver, right? Because it's cool, right? Big watch, nice haircut, good fade, it's the whole thing. But when you're a racing driver, you should have your race suit on. When you're not in the car and you're not in your garage, you should not have your race suit on. Separate them out. So that when you go out on track, it's like Batman putting on his suit, You anchor that state of, here we go, I'm invincible. Yeah. To that. So it's but too many drivers and riders go from weekend to weekend and do the same thing and hope for a different result. Because that's what we do. We rock up and we do the thing that we do, and then some weekends it goes our way and some weekends it doesn't. Okay, well, what are you doing differently the next time? Oh no, we just do that again and we see if it goes our way this time. Okay, that's weird.
It's the definition of insanity, isn't it?
Yeah. And it's surprising, because I had a Premier Class driver tell me a couple of years ago that weirdly the team never really looked at data from the Sunday, because the Sunday was over. What was the point? And it's kind of like, I see the point of view, but I also see that, man, you're missing a lot of information from that. So I think when it comes to confidence, we can build confidence in that we can make it show up. I usually talk about it's like the example I use is like a genie in a bottle. We rub the lamp and the genie appears. Or the other example I use is, if you think about, let's say the Joker's holding up Gotham City Bank. Who do we want showing up to stop him, Batman or Bruce Wayne? Well, they're the same person. Yeah, but I want Batman showing up. Yeah, but they're the same person. Yeah, but I want Batman showing up. And it's like, yeah, but they're the same person. And all that's really different is the state, right? And I'm sure Bruce Wayne, when he puts on his, fake abbed rubber bulletproof suit, he suddenly goes, whoa, scoosh scoosh aftershave. I'm feeling like the man now. It changes how we feel, you know. So confidence is something we can create, but it's usually a collection of beliefs, and that comes from competence as well. The biggest problem is that when we get caught up in a mental narrative and mental noise, like we all do day to day, and we get in our own heads, and then we start to believe what we're saying to ourselves, and we start to get emotional. Done. Go home. It's over. Unless you've got strategies and tools and techniques for being able to recognise and manage that, it usually snowballs from there, and you just see somebody's weekend. Each session progressively worse. We're overdriving, we're overriding, and each mistake generates even more mental noise, and it just snowballs. So it's the self-management, competence creates confidence. Not sure if that answered your question.
No, I mean, I think in that regard, keeping on the sort of state that you talk about, I was looking through Motorsportmind the other day, and you seem to mention something called the flow state a lot. That's something that's quite key to unlocking sort of that extra, 10th, wherever it is. Could you kind of explain what that is and kind of, Yeah,
so flow state, we've all had flow state. I don't know if you guys are gamers. Are you gamers?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You know that, when you sit down to play a game, you go, I'll just sit down, I'll do this for an hour, and you wait, you look at the clock 4 hours later, and you're like, oh my God, right? Because you've just been in that sweet spot, right? In that place where time changes in its nature. Things don't seem hard, they seem easier. And everything goes like how you want it to go. And flow state, again, it comes back to what I said earlier about reducing variables. Csikszentmihalyi, I can't say his name properly, who discovered and coined flow. There's eight major components of flow state. And really, when you look at each one of those, it is a variable that we can help to reduce. So that if you speak to, I had it with a driver back in January, doing the Asian Le Mans at, I can't remember if it was Abu Dhabi, Dubai. He said, in race 2 I was in flow state. It's like, okay. Why? Why? Right? Because it's like a combination lock. If you get each element of flow locked up, flow flows. It's like an electrical circuit. It's like having everything switched on so that the current can pass through. And that will happen sometimes naturally. The key is, when it happens naturally, to ask yourself, why? What did I eat last night? What time did I go to my bed? What's been happening this week? What am I wearing? Do I have any doubts here? Am I just confident here? What's the ingredients in my sausage that made flow state happen? Yeah? And when I'm taking drivers and riders through it, I get a 5-step pre-performance process that they go through, and each one of those is aiming to address one of these kind of tumblers in the lock that help to increase the chances of flow state showing up. Because it will show up for every driver or rider sometimes. But it's like, you guys, you ever sit down in the morning and you get into that whole, what Cal Newport calls deep work, and you just crack through, and you spend 90 minutes working, and you're like, oh my God, I've done all my work today already. And you're like, if I could bottle that, wow, I'd be a machine. And that's flow state. But again, we should ask a question, well, why? What was different about me then? What were the ingredients that went in that allowed that to happen, and how can I come up with a process to make it predictable, repeatable and consistent? And in the pre-performance process that I go through and teach every driver and rider, and it's the same for them all, each one of those tumblers is just trying to get one of those components of flow in place so that we increase the chances of it showing up more regularly and consistently.
I think the combination lock metaphor you've given is really a good way to visualize it, really, because as you say, there are a multitude of elements that all play into being in this flow state, and obviously in motorsport, flow state for me, in my interpretation, would equate to fastest laps or wins, or in the longer term, winning a championship. You've consistently showed up at every opportunity and made the very most of it, and that's equated to success, the ultimate success, which for drivers is winning, defeating the competition.
It's like you just said there, that flow state and that consistency doesn't necessarily mean they're the person doing that fastest lap or throwing it at the scenery, because that person might only be doing it 1 in every 10 times. But the person that's competent and consistent and can regularly get flow state to show up, we all know drivers and riders that can finish 3rd, 4th in their championship in races throughout the year and still end up on 2nd or top step at the end of the year, just because they consistently show up and are competent. They're not necessarily walking away on the top of the box with the trophy every time, but they're consistent and they are reliable and they're predictable, and boom, 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 lap after lap. It's not, when I'm talking to drivers and riders, any grid, everybody can do a fast lap. Anybody. Right? But who can do that 112.1, 112.2, 112.1, 112 dead, 112.1, 112.1, 112.2, 112 dead? Who can do that? Because that's going to be the successful thing. And then that's when we start to look at distraction and mental noise and internal chatter. And when something doesn't go to plan, how you respond to that, how you get yourself back on track and just hold that. When I'm starting to work with drivers and riders, the easiest way for people to think about mental skills and understand that this thing is the variable is start of a race. Imagine you're going to turn 1, somebody sends it up your inside, pushes you wide. Okay? And this weekend you hook back up behind them, you go, it's not a problem, I know where I'm going to take them, it's fine. Another weekend, you start the race, somebody goes up your inside at turn 1, pushes you wide, and you're like, oh, you're running on. And it's like, whoa, hang on a second. It's exactly the same trigger, it's exactly the same stimulus. Why is the response different? It's because you're different. That's why. You're the variable. And if you can learn to just... I always say it's kind of like being a machine. It's like if you think of Arnold Schwarzenegger in The Terminator, he's not mad. He's just on a mission. Right? He's just applying.
Programmed.
Right? I'm just doing. I'm not mad. I'm not emotional. I'm just getting the job done. I've got a mission. That's what you should be as a driver. Because as soon as we bring in emotion, it's a problem. I've always had that with deltas, right? I've never quite understood the point of a delta, because I've never met a driver or a rider that doesn't have an emotional response to the delta. Right? They either start pushing too hard because they think, this is amazing, I'm so fast, or they look down and they go, oh no, I'm down, I'll start pushing too hard. It's a really, and learning to control those emotions and just stick to the mission, stick to the plan, do your job, be competent is the thing, because that's the thing that over the long term will be successful, and teams will thank you as well, because you're going to spend less time in the gravel, less work for the mechanics to do at 2 a.m. in the morning, less costs, more predictability, better for the team, better for everybody, by learning to manage yourself optimally.
Yeah, so my understanding of that then would be that for the most part it's all about compartmentalization then, about being able to show up on the day and remove the emotion from it. I mean, thinking of a more recent example I'll mention Formula 1 again, that's what Manav and I are most knowledgeable about, I'd say. With a more recent example, at Red Bull, as you'll know, with the whole Lawson-Tsunoda situation, and last year with the whole Perez situation, obviously it's a bit of an isolated case, as they'll be up against Max Verstappen, which is no easy feat, has to be said. I wonder, do you believe that if those drivers that are let's take Perez as an example. He had a very tough time of it last year, and that was kind of laid out plain to see in the public eye. It was very publicised. There was a lot of eyes on him every weekend, and what you were saying earlier about being able to push that aside and not listen to the internal voices that are influenced by external voices. He may have been sat there questioning himself, and I'm sure he was, and that's why he made the mistakes that he did, most likely that led to him then being booted from the team. But I wonder, do you think if those F1 teams, or any motorsport team for that matter, if they spent more time, not that they don't already, if they spent more time though dedicated to training, coaching those drivers mentally and making them more fortified in a mental sense than, say, the development of the car or how many hours they have in the wind tunnel or on the treadmill as drivers, would they see more success, and would we see a completely different set of drivers?
So I'd say if they spent any time on it, it would be a bonus. I understand, okay? So if you're a driver or rider and you're not on track, what can you do to feel like you are keeping up your chops, you're keeping up what I call your minimal operational readiness, you're contributing to your success and your performance? Oh, well, we'll go to the gym more. Yeah, because like you weren't fit already. Or I'll spend another 10 hours on the sim. Yeah, but on the sim, you're not feeling that. Every driver will say it's all about feel. And what don't you get in the sim, apart from a little bit of a vibrating wheel? You're not getting that transfer of G. You're not getting that thing when that back end goes like, you go, ooh, right? You're not getting that. So sims have a role, gyms have a role. With drivers that get fixated on their kind of fitness, I always ask them, have you been testing recently? They go, yeah. Sure. How many laps did you do in testing? What, did 120 laps in testing? Right. If you can do 120 laps in testing in a day, you're way fitter than you need to be for your race weekend. Right? Because you're not going to be doing 120 laps across the 3 days. So if you're fit enough to go testing, you're fit enough. What about the mental side? How much time are you spending on that? And the answer is, well, I don't need to because I'm confident. Well, really? It's that weak link, but then we also confuse we confuse like the kind of neuroscience of it and the mind, right? So the way that I always like to think about it is, you could look inside you've got a 55-inch OLED TV, right? You could pull the back panel off it and you can look inside and you can see the ICs and the power board and the capacitors and this. That doesn't tell you what's on the screen, right? And we've all got the same hardware, but we've all got very, very different software. And one of the things that I always like to see is people are they'll all use like blaze pods and reaction lights and stuff like this, and it's kind of like, okay, so that's fine, and you go, well, why are you doing that? Oh, for my reaction times. Okay, and are you measuring your reaction times after you've done that? Did you measure them before, or are you just, oh no, so they're just going through a process. And one of the things is, everything starts up here, right? You can't tap a tappy lit up light if you're worried about your poorly cat, right? Because you get distracted, you get mental noise, you're not fully present. If you've just seen something on Instagram or social media that's giving you an emotional reaction in a negative way, and your focus isn't there and you get that mental noise going, you're not going to be present enough for your reaction times to count. So there's always something that comes before all of that, and that is your mind. You can't turn a wheel without it coming from up here. You can't make a decision without it coming from up here. Everything, and of course I'm biased, but everything starts here. Your decision to go to the gym to overtrain starts up here. Your decision to jump on the sim starts up here. Everything starts up here. And in racing, and I think this is a truism, there is definitely that whole working harder, not smarter approach. And it's just like, no, it's not the case. It's just not the thing. More doesn't necessarily mean better. there comes a point, and it's. I have to explain that, when you're thinking about track athletes, they taper before their events, right? That drivers and riders mainly drivers could learn a lot from that. You don't spend 10 hours every day on the sim up until Thursday night, Or a few years ago, I had a WRC driver who he'd stay up till 2 or 3 in the morning doing his pace notes because he wanted them to be just right. And it's like, yeah, but now you're tired. So your pace notes are great, but now your reaction time and your focus is worse, and you're more emotionally volatile.
Must be your worst nightmare.
Yeah, because it's the fundamentals. I talk about the 3 pillars of performance. And you've got technical, physical, and mental. Those are the 3 pillars of performance. Technical is essentially hard skills usually. It's your racecraft, your knowledge, geometry, all the kind of things to do with the nuts and bolts of racing, the technical side of it. Then your physical side, of course, is your fitness, your nutrition, hydration, sleep, that kind of thing. And then the mental side of it is your emotional self-regulation, your ability to retain your focus and concentration, that self-management aspect. And again, if you think about the 3 pillars, you could be in the fastest, best set up car. You could be the fittest guy out there. If your head's full of custard, it doesn't really matter. Right? I may see it. A lot of the time, I'm always interested in onboard communications, because generally speaking, the more they onboard the communication, the more chatty somebody is being, the more noise they're generating up here, and they're in trouble. They're generating a lot of self-distraction if they're being really chatty. Generally, if everything's under control, there's not a lot of conversation going on, and if you're in flow state, there's certainly not a lot of conversation going on. It's the mental side of it is something that it is hard to pin down, because it is kind of ephemeral, and everybody is, going back to one of your earlier questions, everybody does have different ways of doing things. When I'm teaching people mental tools, so I've got 65-ish practical mental tools that I teach people, and I will see people end up doing them completely differently, and I'm like, what's that? That's not. I don't show you how to do it. What on earth are you doing? Right? But the question for me is always, does that work? And if they go, oh yeah, works every time, keep doing it. It's fine.
Your job's done for you.
It's fine.
Yeah.
So we are all different in that regards, but there are these universal things. But it is, when you're dealing with individuals, everybody has different needs, and of course the other problem is always success. Success is one of the biggest problems, because when people are successful, well, it's just because I'm naturally brilliant. And people then forget about all the hard work they put in, and stop paying attention so much to all the stuff that they did beforehand to make them successful. And then that's when we start to see the sort of top of the game descent until they work hard again and bring themselves back up to the top of the game, and then that descent again. And I think we all know, particularly like Premier Class, like Formula One, the amount of noise and distraction around it in the last 5 to 10 years is vastly different from how it used to be. There is more of that social, everybody's a celebrity now in it, right? And that is a big source of noise, and learning how to manage that noise as a driver, and to be able to come back to that whole thing about, I'm just focusing on my thing, is super important when it comes to performance.
It's great to have your insight. I think, obviously, you've worked with a multitude of people, and you come to realise after a certain point that everyone does things differently. And again, that quote that you gave earlier about that everyone's got the same hardware up here, but it's how it's used, how you apply those mental techniques that makes the real difference. I did want to ask, so about Motorsportmind, why did you start this whole brand? What was your reason in the beginning was it that you yourself had tried to apply some of those mental techniques and thought, hang on, I'm pretty good at this, or you gave advice to somebody else and it worked for them and you thought, hang on, I could help way more people here?
It's yes to all of that.
Yeah.
So I suppose I was always interested back in the early 90s, 1993. I first trained to be a hypnotherapist. But I was but 21 years old, and I very quickly convinced myself, who wants to see a 21-year-old hypnotherapist, right? Because it does seem weird when you think about it like that. But there's no reason why that should be a barrier. And I realise that now. But then I went off and I became an audiologist for 15 years. And in 2004, my friend Dr. Kerry Spackman used to be with McLaren. He called me up and said, I'm working on this project with a motorsport mental coach. Could you give us a hand with it? Because one of the things that I used to do at that time as a side hustle was write music. Right? I do have an entry on IMDb. And I went, yeah, sure, I'll help you with that. And I started working with them on this project. And then Kerry went back to New Zealand. He left McLaren, went back to New Zealand. And I ended up working with this other guy. And he just said, didn't you train to be a hypnotherapist? I said, yeah. He says, well, you can just help me with this project then. And that was 2004. And so just worked together. And then it was in 2012, I think it was. It was 2012. I just thought, you know what? I can do this, So I went back and I redid all my hypnotherapy, did all my NLP, did everything again. And I just thought, no, I've got a thing here. And then Motorsportmind, I think it was about 10 years ago, when I just came up with the idea of Motorsportmind as a thing. And then just over the years, the different iterations as you go through it, whereas now I've got a solid program, a solid set of tools, a pre-performance process, post-performance process. It is structure, and once people learn it, they can then actually start to mix and match and pick and mix their own mental tools into the structure to manage themselves, and it just works. And it's just something that I love my job. I absolutely love my job, as you can tell, because Manav said, can we talk for 40 minutes? I'm like, yeah, no. You're getting more than that, Manav. It's the whole motorsport mind, and the motorsport thing. I was always into motorsport, always, personally, but the motorsport avenue for me was pretty much accidental all through Kerry. It's funny actually, because we were both I had to do an interview for El Mundo newspaper when Max won the championship, and the reporter was asking me for all quotes on this, that and the other, and then he sent me a copy of the article, and he was quoting both me and Kerry in the same article, and I was like, oh my, I haven't spoken to Kerry for ages, so I caught up with Kerry and said, we're both in the same thing now, although he's on there. But yeah, it was accidental for me, and as I said at the start, 99% of what I do now is motorsport. As I said, occasionally Olympic athletes, golfers, MMA fighters, that kind of thing. But again, when we look at all those things, it's the same thing. It's no different. You get one opportunity. I'm going to be quoting Eminem here. You get, which there's a little thing for you. Over the years, it's the most popular state-setting song that people listen to before they go out on the track.
Wow.
Is 8 Mile. Lose yourself. Because it's the perfect sentiment. You get one opportunity to go out there and do it properly. and be your best. And it's that whole thing there. I think it's the most underdeveloped aspect of performance in any sport. I had it actually with one of my non-motorsport people. He was a pentathlete, and he could, I think is that the one they do the shooting in? He could shoot faster and more accurately than the World Championship in practice. Well, if you can do it, and you have the hard skill, that technical skill, the physical part of it, and the knowledge part of it, and the ability part of it, what changes? Just context has changed. And it's the same with anybody that's got that performance thing. People spend hundreds, thousands of hours practicing. Why can't you deliver that thing when you get to the moment in time? Nothing to do with your reaction times. It's nothing to do with your understanding of geometry or aero. It's how much noise this is generating. That's the thing that gets in your way. And of course, the more the noise goes up, the more mistakes you make, the more the noise goes up, snowballs, then we start to get emotional.
Yeah.
But Motorsport Mind all came around a very organic route for me. But I love what I do. And I always love the light bulb moments when you get... Because let's face it, it's not a sexy thing, right? Sims are sexy, right? Let's just say it, right? Sims are super, super sexy things. Going to the gym and being ripped on your Instagram pictures and all that, that's sexy. Yeah. Have you thought about working on your mental skills? Oh, right? That's not sexy, right?
Yeah.
It's essential. Not sexy, but it is essential. And I said to my wife the other day, because somebody said something to me, one of my drivers, and it's that when you get that light bulb going on, when they go, actually, it's actually, I was speaking to the rider. Actually, it was the rider that said it. He said to me, it's a quote on my website. He said, "If I'm right, the bike's right," and I think that sums it up.
That's great. Yeah.
And in any motorsport, because if you're right, it doesn't matter. If you're given a three-legged donkey to go out and race with, you're going to get the best out of it and you're going to do your job, right? But if you're not right and you're given a three-legged donkey, we're not even through lap one and we're on the radio saying what a terrible, it's got terrible oversteer, terrible understeer, this is terrible, I'm just going to box, I can't do it. Shh. Right? If you were right, it doesn't matter. You'd come in and you go, yeah, it's really understeered. It's got nothing in there. You'd just be doing your job and parking the emotion to the side. So it's if I'm right, the bike's right. I think that's a beautiful quote because it sums it up.
No, yeah, that is a very beautiful quote, and I think that kind of sums up, I guess, how important it is to have everything in line. As you said, you can go to the gym and make sure you're, the fittest you can be, but if your mind's not there, then you might as well go home. Before we go, do you kind of just want to tell us where we can find you, where we can find Motorsport Mind? And also, I wanted to mention that you've also got a podcast as well, so do you have where can we find you, basically?
Yeah, so if you go to podcast.motorsportmind.com, or it is on Apple and every other good podcast provider, like your good selves, and motorsportmind.com. I've also got an online academy as well for people that are just getting started in their motorsport journey with their mental skills. So if they're not ready to go all the way to like personal coaching yet, they can go to the academy and they can learn there, and that's just motorsportmind.online. It's something that, just to speak to your point there, Manav, about preparation, just think, okay, Manav, what's your favourite band in the world? Or artist, your favourite artist?
Oh, my favourite artist right now, I don't know, Lana Del Rey, probably.
Okay, so imagine, do you think Lana Del Rey rocks up at the O2 and goes, what songs are we doing tonight? Oh, no, I've forgotten that one. What do you mean you don't know the bass line? Oh, do you think they've prepared? Do you think they've prepared to perform? Yeah, we don't wait till we show up and just, I'm sure we'll get it right. No. You guys coming on today and me coming on, we got ourselves in the right frame of mind. You had your questions, you had your thing. We prepared. It's the key to everything. But yeah, podcast, online academy, the website, Instagram, all the social channels. If anybody's got any questions about motorsport and mental performance, just get in touch.
Yeah, and of course we'll put Motorsport Mind's sort of socials and website down in the episode description. But yeah, once again, thank you so much, Greg, for coming on to talk to us.
Man, I was like, God, can we make him shut up?
No.
Not
I
at
mean,
all.
we could talk. Honestly, we could talk for hours because there's so many things that I think crop up in conversations like this. Because when we're talking about Red Bull, I mean that's just the whole can of worms.
Oh, I mean, what an absolute cluster.
Yeah.
I mean, number one, airing dirty laundry in public. The problem is the access, with the radios and everything, and the fact that everything's, Netflix, and that whole insight into dirty laundry. But it shows you that there's coming back to the radio thing. It's just such a thing. If there's a lot of noise, somebody's definitely not in flow state, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of chatting. No. And I did a thing last year when there was the incident with Max when he'd been up to 3 a.m. on the sim and then jumped in the car the next day. Well, if you worked for me, I'd have fired you. Right? Because you're paid very well to do a very good job for me not staying up to 3 a.m. in the morning on your second job. Right? There's things, but it is the sport now. It's how it is, and I think it will only. I think we're actually coming to a really interesting juncture with esports, because when you look at esports, it lowers the barrier to entry to motorsport. Just like, let's face it, nobody goes racing if they don't have money. It's not a thing. It's not a thing. Yep. You've got to have deep pockets, which comes back to your point, Miles, about are they the best drivers in the world? No, they're just the one with the best resources.
Yep.
And talent. They've got talent as well. Nobody's taking that away. But in any walk in life, you will have worked with people, known people who were supremely good at what they did, but fell by the wayside. Usually to do with finance, there's the second hustle, but they don't have time for it because they've got other commitments and this kind of thing and stuff, and they just fall by the wayside. And racing's no different. I've known so many drivers and riders, just like super talents, that just we don't have the funding to go up to the next level. Don't have the contacts, don't have the deep pockets for it. But esports takes that away. And it makes it a much more accessible. And if you think about it, the experience for the end viewer is no different. I'm just looking at it on a screen, and graphics these days are so good. Might as well be watching the real thing. Yeah. So the end user experience, or the consumer experience, isn't that much different. But the barrier to entry is not zero cost, but it's low cost. And in esports, wait for this, you can actually make money. Yeah. Who makes money in racing? Nobody. So I think esports across the next 5 to 10 years is just going to be amazing for motorsport. Even though it's virtual, I think it's going to be amazing for the sport, and it will be a real. I don't even think it will be a training or breeding ground for real world motorsport. I think it's going to just be its own thing. I don't think it needs to even be part of that real nuts and bolts and oil and rubber thing. From my point of view, same tools apply though. I've got people that when they're on iRacing, they get just as stressed as they do in real life, because they want to succeed just as much. So it's an interesting time we live in, but I think certainly the sort of the kind of circusy media element of motorsport has very much changed the distractions that drivers have to. It's social media too, right? You would hope that most drivers and riders are never anywhere near their social media because it's just noise.
True.
It's noise that takes your eye off the game, and it could plant seeds of doubt, which then affects the C word. Confidence.
No,
just to clarify.
Yeah, no, we'll be sure to make sure the C word is definitely defined for those who skip a few seconds ahead. But no, honestly, I think genuinely of all the interviews we've done, not many, but we have done a few, and I feel like I've genuinely learnt a lot today.
Good.
We came into this interview kind of not knowing too much about the mental side. Obviously, you know, we've spoken to Steve Nichols, the guy who designed Ayrton Senna's MP44. We kind of have a decent idea about how it works in terms of the tech side and stuff, but yeah, I think going into this we actually had no idea of how nuanced it is.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
That's it, right? Because how you describe mental skills? It's all about vague and woolly, and then people confuse it with mental health. That's the other thing that I get. So every October around World Mental Health Day, I got all these inquiries and things, and you come on podcasts and do interviews and stuff like this about drivers' mental health, and they're worried about crashing and the safety. No, it's not a thing. It's not a thing.
Yeah.
Mental fitness and mental performance is a very different thing. And that being able to recognise your own behaviour when it's good, recognise your own behaviour when it's going off track, and then knowing what to do about it in a process-driven way to get yourself back on track is the thing. But it's not talked about really, and it's that hidden weird thing that, well, what is it? Actually, it's funny. I've got a YouTube video to do next week on mental skills in motorsport, what it is and what it's not, right? Because you'll get people going, "Oh, is that like therapy and stuff?" No. If you need therapy, you probably shouldn't be racing. Right?
That's a very good point.
Because you're probably vulnerable, right? And that's probably not a good thing. And I'm sure if you're in some kind of semi-decent professional team, that will have been screened out. Your resilience is going to be there already. And again, most people, not everybody, will have come up through karting. And that is the toughest paddock of any in motorsport.
Yeah.
100%. Karting is brutal. And if you've learned to deal with that, then you say it.
Yeah, no. Well, I mean,
karting's tough.
No, yeah. When Miles and I go karting, we find that it's probably the hardest thing we've ever done.
Wow.
It's the equivalent of being put in a sack and hit with a baseball bat for 10 to 15 minutes. It's like falling down the stairs physically.
It feels
Especially
like
if
that.
it's raining. Yeah.
I mean, most of the time we're up against like young children, and we still lose. So it's very mentally tough in that way to have to accept defeat to someone that is half as tall as you, weighs.
I'll tell you a quick story about that. So this is about 4 years ago. I had a well-known driver in his own country. He said to me, "I've been invited to this television event, and they want to go onto a kart track and do something with karters and stuff." And he says, "I've really done karting. I think I'm going to cancel because, I mean, it's great PR and all that, but I'll be terrible. So I'm not going to do it. I'm going to cancel it." And I said, "Oh no, don't do that." He said, "Why?" I said, "Because it is great PR." I said, "But what you have to do is," a therapist friend of mine once said, "If you can't hide something, paint it red." And I said, so the first thing you say to the TV interview is you go, "Have you seen these guys? These guys are amazing. Oh, well, they're going to hand my ass to me today. They're going to teach me a few things on this track today. If I can even get close to them, I'll be lucky. But I'm not expecting anything today because these guys are amazing." There you go. Problem solved. You've made them look good, and you've said that you're not going to be any good at all.
Yeah.
And it's like if you go on track and you've got that kind of situation, that's what you do. So these young guys that you go karting with, oh, you're going to be so good, you're going to beat me hands down, and then if you do a half decent job,
we do always end up losing against them. So,
well, that wraps up another episode of the Race Reaction podcast. Well, thank you to Greg, who gave a very good insight into, I guess a very interesting world of side of motorsport, I guess. This is our first episode released on Acast as well, so now you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and pretty much wherever else you can get your podcasts, Deezer, Amazon. You can get them everywhere nowadays, right?
yep.
So yeah, I guess I think Greg genuinely probably has been our best interview in a long time. No offense to the others. Unless you have anything to add, Miles.
No, I think it was great to have him on. I do think he's right about that the mental side of things, the mental aspect of motorsport isn't really talked about enough. I mean, we always see these like social media posts saying, "Oh, Max Verstappen has got this mentality," or I don't know, Sebastian Loeb has got a great mentality and he's got this good rapport with his co-driver, or whatever it is. But a lot of the time, it's not really talked about, like what that mentality is, because it's very easy to, again, I'll use Max as an example because I just like him. It's easy to look at him and go, well, his mentality is just to push people off the track, and that that Senna thing of, well, I'm going to put you in a position where you either let me past or you crash. That's not really, I don't think Greg would be able to coach anyone and say, look, to win, just crash someone out. I don't think that's the techniques that Max are using, but I certainly agree it's something that's not really talked about a lot. And it's, with the example we talked about with the whole Perez, or even the Lawson Tsunoda situation of that second Red Bull seat, it is very very interesting to think about the mental side of that, how they would have been dealing with that. Obviously they've been dealt a huge blow by having this sort of public kind of humiliation, and a lot of scrutiny from external voices and media outlets and fans, etc. How they're able to just block all of that out and just focus on turning up to the track and doing the job. And I think Greg's right. It's very easy to include emotion in these things, and I'm sure when it comes to those races where the championship's on the line, and there's an immense amount of pressure on people, it's very easy for drivers to become emotional about it. I know it would me, and I get quite angry at local go-kart tracks when I'm racing against teenagers, and they're a lot better than me, and I get annoyed. So even at that level, it's very easy to have emotion come into it and affect your performance. And I'm sure that Greg's obviously he's not really allowed to name any names, which is fine. But I'm sure he's worked with loads of drivers and just general motorsport personnel over the years where he's managed to help them compartmentalise and be able to see it as a process more than anything. He talks a lot about processes and confidence not necessarily always being the determining factor in whether you or not you succeed. It's more about competence. He had a few great quotes in there about preparation is performance, and it's not about confidence, it's competence. And I would agree to an extent. So overall I think that was a great chat with Greg. And he's got a very interesting kind of brand with Motorsportmind. I think it's a very it's got a very unique position in the industry, and something that I think he's really struck gold with it.
True, just like Race Reaction.
Yeah, and we've got cool purple branding, and he's got cool green branding and stuff.
How cool is that? But yeah, I guess we'll link all of Greg's stuff that we mentioned in the description below. And again, thank you very much for listening to this episode of Race Reaction. And yeah, I guess we'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.